Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flix Files. My name's Roger. So in my previous video, I thought I would talk about Star Wars. It's one of the film franchises that I haven't yet covered on my channel. In fact, there are a lot of them that I've not yet covered. But we have plenty of time, and I wanted to do something Star Wars related. So in my previous video, I ranked the 11 Star Wars films that there currently are as of early 2025. And spoilers if you've not watched that video, but I ranked the original Star Wars movie as number 1. And I said that I would do a video about that particular movie. But I didn't want to do a video that's like a deep dive like I normally do. There are thousands and thousands of videos on YouTube about the original Star Wars movie. And everything good and everything bad you could possibly say about that movie has been covered many, many times. And there's absolutely nothing new that I could add to that. So I thought, well, if I want to do a movie about Star Wars, a video, should I say, what on earth do I do? And it occurred to me that one thing that not many YouTubers do, and maybe there's good reason for this, is talk about what the original Star Wars movie means to them. And that's kind of what I want to just quickly do in this video. I'm just going to quickly go through my history with that movie, what it did to change me as a person, and just why it means so much to me over the years. And to do that, we need to go back a long, long time. I was born in 1970. So I'm what you call a Generation X, which I believe the demographic of that is people born between 1965 and 1980. So I'm kind of in the very start part of Generation X. And so I am old enough to remember a world that didn't have Star Wars in it, where you could walk up to somebody in the street and say Star Wars, and they would just look at you as if you'd just come out of a mental asylum, and they wouldn't understand what you meant. So, and it's very hard to remember those times because Star Wars is now so ingrained in our culture that it's very, very difficult to remember a point where it just didn't exist. And I've thought long and hard before I decided to do this video. What was my first remembrance of Star Wars? Because back then, in the mid to late 70s, there wasn't the internet or anything like that. So to get information about anything would involve going to a library. And certainly when it came to up and coming movies, I think the only two sources of information would have been, and if you live in the UK, you'll know who this is, but there was a chap called Barry Norman who did a TV series every year, so it would be named after that year. For instance, in 1977, it would be called Film 77. And Barry Norman was very much sort of the go-to guy to learn about new movies.
But for the real family entertainment at its most sublime, you'll have to wait till after Christmas when Star Wars opens in London. Even by the standards of Hollywood, a place where nothing succeeds like excess, Star Wars is a phenomenon. It only opened in America at the end of May, but already it's the biggest box office hit in cinema history, having grossed the best part of $200 million in the United States alone. Perhaps one important reason for this immense popularity is that it somehow combines elements of all the best-loved themes of romantic adventure, from the Arabian Nights to the Western, from the Knights of the Round Table to science fiction and space fantasy.
And I've been thinking hard, when did I first hear about Star Wars? And I'm guessing it would have been at some point in 1977, because Star Wars opened in the UK in late December of 1977. And as I've said before on this channel, I had an aunt that ran our local cinema, so I could always get in for free. So I'm going to say that I would have seen Star Wars either in the opening week or very, very early in 1978. But whichever of those two it was, I would have been 7 years old. So I'm guessing it's at some point during 1977 that I came across a photo in a magazine that we used to get called TV Times. And I can remember this photo very vividly. And I've searched for it on the internet and I found it quite easily. And it's this photo. And I remember seeing this photo of these two robots and not knowing who they were and just thinking, God, that's really weird, like a gold robot and like another robot that looks like a white dustbin. And then when I read the little bit of text underneath the picture, it would have said C-3PO and R2-D2 from Star Wars. And that was my very first introduction to Star Wars. So what led me from that moment to then wanting to see this movie in the cinema, I really don't know. But I had quite a few school friends that were very much into films as well and science fiction. And one of them I know used to buy a magazine called Starlog. And I remember it was because of him and Starlog that I got introduced to the world of Ridley Scott's Alien in early 1979. So I'm going to say that he had some influence in it as well, and maybe he brought in a magazine to school that had a bit of Star Wars in it. I don't know. But the only other thing I can think of was that the bubblegum cards that were all the rage. I remember having a few of the Star Wars bubblegum cards, and I believe they were released prior to the movie. And every card had a picture of a scene from the movie. And I remember having a small handful of those and would look at the pictures on those cards very closely and just try and memorize them. So we then got to the point where I saw this film at the cinema. And I think it's fair to say that before Star Wars, I didn't really think about movies that much. They were just something that were on the TV. And we'd sit down as a family and watch it if it was like a Bond film or something. But as a 7-year-old, I certainly didn't have a favourite movie, as you'd call it, because I probably hadn't seen that many movies at that point. I'd either be out playing with my friends or playing with toys or just not sat watching movies. But it's fair to say that after I saw Star Wars for the first time, it completely rewired my brain. And Star Wars became my favourite movie at that point. And I just suddenly became aware of films and how you could get completely absorbed in the world of movies, especially films like Star Wars. And I always feel very thankful that I saw this movie when I was 7, which I think is the perfect age for this movie. Because as a 7-year-old, you're still learning, you're still open to the world, and just absorbing Star Wars for that first time just completely set me on a path in my life. And also, at some point during 1977, 1978, I would have seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And when I think of that original Star Wars movie, I also think of Close Encounters, and they're like a double whammy. And I've always said that it's the combination of experiencing those two movies within close proximity of each other just completely made me fall in love with film and science fiction. So that's my introduction to this film. And that's why I still think it's my favourite Star Wars movie. And another thing about having Star Wars, and I don't like calling it A New Hope that much, or Episode 4. I always try and call it Star Wars, because I just remember a time when it didn't say Episode 4 and A New Hope on the opening crawl at the beginning of the movie. And when I saw Star Wars for the first time, and I think I saw it 3 times at the cinema, I didn't know there were going to be sequels. To me, it was a one-off. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Anyone that's never seen or heard of Star Wars could sit and watch that original movie, and hopefully they would enjoy it and be enthralled by it and would come away feeling fulfilled. There's no massive cliffhanger at the end of that movie, other than the fact that Darth Vader tumbles off into space in his TIE fighter. I guess that was the one thread that they left open for a sequel. Well, certainly when I watched it as a kid, I never assumed there'd be sequels. I just thought that was it. That was a one-off, and it was there to enjoy. So when I heard that some years later, a few years later, they were doing The Empire Strikes Back, I remember having mixed feelings about it because I thought, well, how can it be better than Star Wars? And in a way, all the characters in that film and the arc that they have is so perfect. I didn't really want to see what happened next, as daft as that sounds. So I watched the movie and I would have gone home. And of course, at that point, we wouldn't have had a video recorder or anything like that. We didn't get our first video recorder till 1981. So other than going back to see it at the cinema again, I had no real way of re-experiencing that film. Except I was in a shop with my mum when we were out shopping. And I'm guessing this was the following year. This would have been at some point in 1978. And on a shelf, I saw a book that had Star Wars on the cover. And it turned out to be the novelization of the film. And I've still got it. I've still got the book. And it's credited on the cover as being written by George Lucas, but I've since learned that it was ghostwritten by the science fiction author Alan Dean Foster, based on George Lucas' screenplay. But I convinced my mum to buy me that book. And I can confidently say that that was the first proper novel that I ever read from cover to cover. And over the preceding sort of 4 years, I would have read that many times because it was an excellent way of reliving the movie in my mind, because I would have seen it 3 times and certain images were burned into my mind so I could very easily recall them. And just rereading that book helped me replay it in my mind because that was the only way I could relive it as an experience. So there was that. And then at, I want to say Christmas 1979, I got possibly the best Christmas present I've ever received in my whole life.
From Kenner's Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back collection, it's Millennium Falcon that you put together. Batteries not included.
Nice landing, Han Solo. Uh-oh, come on, Chewbacca. Stormtroopers are coming.
Action figures each sold separately.
Got him on radar. I'll fire the laser cannon.
There's even a hidden storage hatch.
Ready for takeoff. Jump to light speed. We're gone. On to the Death Star.
Millennium Falcon from Kenner's Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back collection. Action figures each sold separately.
And when you look back at your Christmases when you were a child, I would like to think that there would be one Christmas that would stick out in your mind for reasons that are personal to you. But for me, it would be the Christmas of 1979 when my parents bought me the Millennium Falcon model to go with the handful of Star Wars figures that I had. So I believe this was released by Kenner in America, but in the UK it was released by a company called Palitoy. And I got that Millennium Falcon and I have very, very vivid memories of unboxing it very carefully. And there was a big sheet of stickers that you had to stick onto various parts of the Millennium Falcon. And I just loved that toy and I just played with it for possibly the next 3 years. And we were a working class family and my mum and dad had 4 children and I was the youngest. So they didn't have a lot of money to spend on presents. And I only had a handful of figures. I had friends that had buckets of Star Wars figures and they had just about every vehicle and additional toy in that collection that you could buy. But I didn't. I had the core characters. So I had things like Han and Luke and Leia and Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, I had a Darth Vader, a Stormtrooper, and Ben Kenobi. And I think that was it. And so that was enough to make use of the Millennium Falcon because it meant I could reenact scenes from the movie based around the Millennium Falcon using that toy. And I just loved it so much and I fair wish I still had it. I would love to buy that again and to collect those core figures. But unfortunately, to get them in decent quality is a lot of money, and it's money that I can't really justify spending. I've only got one Star Wars figure in my ownership now, which is one of the Scout Troopers from Return of the Jedi. That's the only one I have. And it's very sad because when I look back at my childhood, they were my favorite toys. And yeah, it just meant so much to me. In fact, it got to the point where I was playing with it even as the sun set and it got dark. And it got to the point where I had to go into another room and put on all the lights to see what I was doing. And my dad, bless him, he rigged a little light bulb that ran off a battery and cut out a tiny little hole in one of the background parts of the interior of the Millennium Falcon because it was made out of cardboard. And he installed this little bulb so it would light up the interior of the ship, and it enabled me to play with it when it got dark. It was, yeah, very, very lovely memories like that. So if I was to kind of go back chronologically to the next point that Star Wars came into my life, it would have been when it was broadcast on British television. Now, this was a big moment for me because I knew that I could record it off the television and it was then there. I had my own copy and I could watch it as many times as I wanted. And just the thought of that was so exciting. And I recall that they aired a trailer on TV saying coming soon. And I've looked on YouTube and I've actually found that trailer. So I'm just going to quickly play that here.
Here they come.
Star Wars, a breathtaking adventure, coming soon on ITV.
And then, sure enough, we got the TV Times one week, and I can remember my dad bringing it home. And the cover of the TV Times for that week had, I think it was Darth Vader on the cover. And I went absolutely nuts, because I knew it would be coming up in like the next 7 days. And my dad, bless his soul, bought a blank videotape just for me to record Star Wars on it. Now, this was 1982. So video recorders had been around since the mid-70s at that point, but they weren't getting into everybody's homes just yet because they were still very expensive. And we had a Betamax video recorder, was our first video recorder. And I remember it was a rental because they were just like £600 to buy. And yeah, I think to buy a blank tape would have then cost, this is like 1982, about 15 to 20 pounds each. So they were a lot of money. And my dad just knew how much it would have meant to me to have a copy of Star Wars, that he thought it best to buy a tape just for that, because eventually they would want to use a tape to record something else. So yeah, he got this tape for me.
Videotape. Let's the color break through.
And I have very vivid memories of sitting in front of the television that Sunday evening it was.
A week today, James Bond is back in From Russia with Love, but now with subtitles on page 199 of Oracle, the spectacular Star Wars.
And Star Wars started, and the remote control for the video was on a wire, like Peter Kay the comedian says, and it was just a single button to pause and unpause the recording. So I sat and watched the movie and fastidiously cut out all of the adverts and when the movie ended, I let it roll right to the end of the credits before I stopped the tape. And then I rewound it and started to watch it again. And my parents said, no, you've got school in the morning. You can't do that. Just leave it for another day. And I have memories of some of my school friends that didn't have video recorders. They came down to my house after school and we would sit and watch Star Wars. And yeah, I probably drove my parents bonkers with the amount of times I ended up putting that movie on. And it was certainly a thing that I would do on a Saturday morning. I would get up quite early on a Saturday morning, have my breakfast, and then sit and watch Star Wars before the rest of the day could play out. Just watch it right at the beginning of the day on a Saturday. So over the preceding 3, 4, 5 years in the 80s, I would have watched Star Wars many, many times. And of course, then we get into the home media releases, which I kind of covered in the earlier video. Suffice to say that I've had this movie on just about every format. I had it on VHS on more than one occasion because I had the original release when it was available to buy, the non-special edition versions in full screen. And then I bought the special edition version, which I still have. And then I bought the widescreen version on VHS. And then I had it on a DVD box set, a Blu-ray box set, and finally I've got them all on 4K. And yes, it's just, I'm hoping, without me rambling on too much, if I draw this video to a close, that I have put across just how much this film means to me without actually talking about the movie. It holds such a special place in my heart. Star Wars is probably in my top 10, if not top 5 movies. One day I will do a video that will do my top 10 in order, and Star Wars will be on that list. And yeah, it just means so much to me. I was a perfect age when I saw it. It made me fall in love with film, fall in love with science fiction, fall in love with reading, because as I said, the Star Wars novel was the first proper book that I ever read cover to cover multiple times. And I actually ended up getting the novelizations of The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi as well, because I felt the same way about those. When I saw those at the cinema, I loved them and I wanted to relive them. And then it was a little bit easier because we had a video recorder at that point, so I was able to rent them from the video shop just a few years after they were on at the cinema. So yes, I have a lot to be thankful for when it comes to the original Star Wars film, and I have so much respect for it. And I feel quite proud to have experienced it at that point in my life as a 7-year-old. And the fact that I can remember a world before Star Wars, and then I look at the world as it is now with Star Wars, just makes me feel just very humbled to think that I've got that difference in my mind and I can see what change that made that movie. And as we go into the 21st century and Disney own the rights to Star Wars, it saddens me a little to see what they've done with that license. I don't want to get into it too much. Suffice to say that as a fan of the originals, and I was there from kind of day one, it was disappointing to see what Disney did with that franchise. And it was obvious that they spent so much money when they bought the rights back in 2012 that they just rushed out movies as fast as they could without sitting down to think of a big storyline like George Lucas did back in the early 70s. He had it all mapped out right from the beginning. He knew exactly where every character was going to go, what was going to happen. And it was very clear with the Disney trilogy that they didn't. They just took it one movie at a time, and the results speak for themselves. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed my little trip down memory lane. If you're around my age, I'm sure there are a few things there that did make you go, yes, I had similar experiences. If you did, let me know in the comments. I would love to read them. And once again, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed that little ramble of mine, give me a thumbs up. And I'll see you soon, guys. So bye for now. Oh, and may the Force be with you.